Welcome to another episode of the Insecure Agents podcast. I'm your host, Allie Howe, and today we have Dick Hardt back with us on the podcast. We are fresh off of AAuth night about 2 weeks ago at AI Engineer, where we had Dick and Carl McGinnis and Ian Livingstone and Herman Erico, plus many others come out to tell us about AAuth, OAuth, runtime security, and also just like the future of agent auth and authentication in general. So super excited to recap that event and also check in with Dick and see what's been going on with AAuth since AAuth night. Dick is the founder of AAuth, and he also founded OAuth previously. Dick, do you want to give a quick intro in case people are not familiar with you or did not attend AAuth night?
Yeah, so at the night we started off with, you introduced Carl, who gave some background around, what are all the activities happening around OAuth with agents and MCP as people are working on incremental, standards and deployments, things like the JAG ID spec. And then he called out, why that's not going to get us to where we want to get to. And then I gave, 5-minute talk that only had 100 slides in it around the vision around what, how I see us being able to take advantage of agents. How do we let agents not just do research for us, but actually do the work that we want to do the work? And so the example was about booking a trip to Japan, and that, a bit of tongue in cheek, that it was going to be a travel agent that was going to go and book my travel for me. And I think we're going to have the recordings of those up soon. So I'm excited to myself see the recording and see how that looked and be able to share it with others.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, all of those recordings, the demo, the panel, all of that will be up on the Insecure Agents YouTube by the time this is published. So super excited to have that, because I know a lot of people have messaged me as well to say, hey, we couldn't attend the event, but we really wanted to see the content. So super excited to get that out there. Because yes, Carl gave an excellent presentation to set the stage on why we need AAuth today. What we're doing with OAuth that's, improving what we have today, but we need something new for agents in the future, and what would that look like? And then you followed up with your presentation on, here's AAuth, here's this example of a travel agent. Yeah, you told me you were going to do 100 slides in 5 minutes, and I was originally pretty concerned about that. But you nailed it. It was really fun, slide format. I really recommend people watch your talk and your demo, because that was very, very interesting. And you definitely captured the audience's attention the whole time. I definitely saw that. So yeah, really great example. And then we had demos from, I think, 4 other people that talked about AAuth and showed why we need it, why current technologies aren't sufficient. And then we concluded the demos with Jared Hansen's demo that showed how an agent can use the mission from AAuth to enhance its runtime decision-making around what it's authorized or not authorized to do, which ultimately helps developers eliminate consent fatigue, which is fantastic. So super excited to continue the conversation around all the benefits that AAuth brings to developers, but also security stakeholders that care about their agent security posture as well. So curious to hear, what were your key takeaways from the event? What do you remember as a standout moment?
When we were talking about putting this together, we picked the Mina Gallery, which is a great venue. It's a great location. Both the venue's great, and it's also close to the conference, and so easy for people to get to. And, I'd reached out to a number of, friends I have in the Valley to say, hey, get there, come a little bit early. And I'm super glad that I told them to come early, because there's an amazing spread of food there. Your team did a great job of setting all of that up. And I didn't really realize that there was 2 long rooms there, because when I'd seen the pictures, I only thought there was 1 room, but there was really 2 rooms, and which was a relief for a number of reasons. So I was thinking it'd be great if we had 60, 80 people show up. And, we were competing against the World Cup with the U.S. playing. So people, a lot of football fans wanted to watch that. And Vercel had a big party with a whole bunch of co-sponsors at the art gallery as a big venue. So if somebody just wanted to go out and party and drink, they had there. And so anybody that showed up to AAuth night, really cared about AAuth night, right? They weren't just like, well, what can I do tonight? Oh, here's some random thing where I'll get some free food and drinks. And I think we had like 160 people come in the door. Was it something like that? It was like a big, like double what I had thought would be like fabulous number of attendees. And so just seeing the volume of people was amazing. And when I stood up on stage and like all the chairs are full and it's 3 people deep at the back, and clearly it overflowed into the other room where people were having to watch it on slides and hear it in a separate overflow room. For me, that was just a moment of pride around something I started working on that had pulled a whole community of people together to learn more and how do we work on these things. That was that was a great feeling for me. And then seeing, other people that had written code and were giving live demos of, prototypes that were using AAuth, showed me, this wasn't just some crazy idea that I'd come up with my own demo, right? That other people were making investment and had aligned on the vision and saw it solving real problems for them. And then I had a large number of people come up to me afterwards that wanted to talk about how they could use AAuth or explore how their project fed in, and which I didn't want to have those conversations at the event itself. And so asked all those people to follow up and have a video call. And so the week after, I think I had about 10 Zoom calls that were all around how somebody else's project would align and fit into AAuth. So super successful event from my point of view, and thank you again, Ali, for helping pull that all together.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure. It was really interesting to have that many people in a room that cared about these problems. I think that was like one of my like biggest takeaways, or like was really cool to see. So many people like feel this problem like day to day, whether it's like the consent fatigue, whether it's around just like the worry of what your agent is allowed or not allowed to do, and adding an actual like hard boundary on top of that. But also just like the usability issues that we've got with like OAuth today, that I know like IDJAG helps with some of this, but yeah, people are having to re-authenticate every time into MCP servers. They're not able to track which MCP servers that they've like authenticated into. So I know IDJAG helps with that, where an IDP now can go ahead and see, or your security IT team can see like using your IDP through something like cross-app access, or the enterprise managed auth through Claude, which is powered by IDJAG, can now see exactly how many MCP servers that someone has like logged into, and they can revoke that at any time versus what we had before, which is like OAuth islands. So I don't know if that's something you want to touch on too, of like if that was resonating or if that was interesting to you as well, of like, okay, like people that are coming to this event actually are feeling this problem day to day and they're looking for a new solution.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of discussion. People are trying to figure out how do we deal with agents, right? And you know, in the intro into AAuth, right, I talked about how software has changed, right? And we're grabbing the tools that we had readily available. OAuth was a great tool, but it was designed for a problem where I had one server talking to another server. We knew ahead of time what we wanted to do. We knew, so you would pre-register, you knew what authorizations you needed, and, it's allowed people to move away from the anti-pattern of giving one server their username and password so that that server could crawl another server, right? So it moved us from websites and crawling of one server to another server to APIs and granular authorization, as opposed to, oh, here's my username and credential, you can just be me on the whole site. And you're seeing a bunch of the same patterns happen now as an agent can go and drive a web browser for you, and that is clearly an anti-pattern that you don't want the browser to go and just basically go shopping for you and buy things and you not really know what it is, and the site doesn't really know that it's an agent doing it and doesn't really know if you're there, right? So there's a whole bunch of security, usability, accountability challenges, and many abuse vectors in all of that. And so people are like, okay, well, how do we need to think about it differently? And so I think a big part of AAuth is let's step back and think about what are we trying to do? What are the what is the model that we want to have? What are we trying to make happen? And so I try to cover that in my talk where I said, like, well, what we really want to do is we want to enable an agent to make decisions of consequence. It's entering into a contract. It's committing me to, a $500 deposit on a dinner. And do I really want the agent to do that? And how do we architect something like that? And the thesis is that, well, we want a separate governance agent, governance server that is able to go and independently of the agent make a decision whether we want to make this happen. But in order to do that, we need to get some pieces in place that don't exist, which is what's the context of what the agent's trying to do, flow that context back up to a governance agent. We want the context from the agent. And then, for many things, it's the agent's doing a mission, right? The travel booking is like, I'm trying to book a whole bunch of travel. And, once I do get a reservation for that omakase dinner at the counter, well, then I need to book all the other things around that of what else is in my trip, and that you want the full context. Also, I don't want the agent to go and book me, 4 omakase counter, restaurants, right? Like I only want one booking. And so you need the context of the mission and everything that's happened in the mission and all the other things around that. One of the examples I use is talking about dropping a database table, because, that's been, something that people have hooked into of agents dropping production tables and, the problems of that. So if the agent's doing software development, and it's, creating a table, dropping a table as a way of churning through and cleaning up the table, right? Well, that's all okay. And so, but if it's dropping production, well, that's bad. But it might not be bad. So just being able to say, can the agent drop a table or not, isn't the right granularity. Like you actually need to know the context of, well, which table, what about the table, right? So that context of like, oh, this table's only been around 30 minutes, it's only got 3 records in it, right? Well, that one's probably okay to drop, as opposed to, oh, this one's been around for 3 years, it's got 4 million records in it, right? It's labeled production, that's probably a really bad idea. Unless the mission was, for the agent was, migrate from my current database to a new database so we can change the schema. And when you're done that full migration and you fully tested it, then we do want to drop the production database because it's no longer the production database. And so without understanding that broader context, you don't know whether dropping production is good or bad, because sometimes it actually might be what you want to have it do. And so our current tool sets don't let us get any of that visibility, right? The IDJ was, help solve a very painful problem for what people are encountering right now, where, say, they've installed Claude and they want Claude to have access to, 6, 8 different resources, and having to go and manually approve all 8 of those is, clear fatigue for the employee trying to manage that. Doesn't give visibility to the organization. So IDJ enables the enterprise to manage and essentially automate consent for enterprise-controlled resources. But it doesn't provide the mission. It doesn't provide context around what's the agent doing it, right? Like it says, like, oh, the agent can go and do anything it wants now with those scopes, right? So it enabled sort of that broad OAuth permission and automated the consent for that and broke down that barrier, but didn't change the model about, the agent connecting to something dynamically it didn't know about beforehand and asking for authorization you didn't know whether it needed beforehand, right? All of these things are predetermined with IDJ, right? It's not a dynamic system at all. uh, it's useful. I think it's great, the conversation, and enables people to sort of see more around what can happen. Because until people start using agents more, they don't necessarily fully appreciate about, well, what do I really want to get doing? Because currently, right, if you go and you give Claude access, right, they intentionally restrict what agent can do because there's no trustable mechanism for it to do things of consequence, and so you just don't let it do them. Of course, the productivity gain of just doing a bunch of those things is useful, but if we think about where do we want to get to, where we want the agent to be doing things that require evaluating, the context at the time of execution, the current platforms aren't, the current architecture isn't going to support that.
Yes, absolutely. I've noticed that as well, where people are fine just doing like a POC agent, but once they actually want to connect it to real tools, or once they want to deploy it within maybe their entire company and have it serve multiple users and over a shared memory store, then you start to see the auth problems for sure come to light. So really excited to present like AAuth as a solution to these individuals. And the broader community. I was wondering too, like, I know we said on the panel, we mentioned it briefly of like, okay, like what's like the adoption timeline between like, okay, we have OAuth today, we have AAuth tomorrow. Do you have any like more thoughts around like how we get there, or like what people can do in the meantime while we're waiting on AAuth to like fully be adopted, or like I guess like what does that timeline like look like for you and your perspective?
Well, having worked on a number of things like OAuth that took off, the first thing is people being able to see how it all works. AAuth is more complex in some ways than OAuth because you have more parties, there's more difference in flow, and has a requirement of the agent having its own key. And so that drives, some additional setup that you don't have in OAuth. And we're still figuring out like what are the ways, how do you get there from here? So on the timeline, a lot of it is like, well, when do people start to feel that, oh, there's a fairly straightforward way to do that? And, I've published and a few other people have published some, proof of concepts around how to do different parts of that that are available, lots of information around AAuth is available at aauth.dev. And I'm working on, a general purpose MCP server that would be able to connect to any AAuth resource, which is one of the features of AAuth is that you don't need to be pre-registered to use a resource. And I'm working on wrapping many of the popular OAuth API sets, things like the Google APIs, so that they can be exposed as AAuth. And then people can start to build some things and use it in some real world situations and places where the current models are cumbersome or don't provide the right security requirements or the right authorization primitives that they want. And we're going to learn a bunch about that. So I think, we have a fair amount of the right primitives and mechanisms in AAuth. I'm sure there's some additional things and some potential changes, things we haven't thought about. And so a lot of what I'm getting a fair amount of it already and would love more of it of like, how does this fit? How does it not fit? A number of people that are driving higher level frameworks around how do you deploy agents. And so those frameworks are descriptive about what should happen, but not prescriptive about how do you do that. And so it's super interesting working with those people, the agent trust framework and AARM around how AAuth is one of the ways that's prescriptive about how do you deploy agents in a way that supports these frameworks that are more descriptive about what you should be doing, and that's calling out where are some pieces where maybe they need to update their framework because they might not have thought about something, or where AAuth needs to provide a little more context or clarity in order to be able to support the vision they have. So that's all pretty exciting, but for people to get involved, we have a Slack workspace. It's fairly active at aauth.slack.com, and then you get the invite link for that off of aauth.dev. Lots of people pop into there and message and ask questions, and so that's a great place to ask questions, particularly on the general list. And I'm answering all of those questions, which then provides answers to anybody else that um, might have a similar question about it. And then that's also being subscribed to that's probably one of the better ways to learn about some of the new software releases and updates in the specs, etc. And then I post about all of those things on LinkedIn, so if you can just follow me on LinkedIn as well to follow all those things.
Yeah, I was really curious to hear from people you talked to at the event or otherwise. Like, what are some of the interesting use cases of AAuth that you've come across?
Well, a few of us were brainstorming after AAuth night, and one of the interesting things could be for the large commerce sites, Shopify, Amazon, places where people already have a payment instrument. And they would like an agent to go and shop for them and help buy things or look for things. And the advantage of those platforms is that, well, you're not having to move payment in it, right? You're doing commerce, but payment's already been figured out independently. And so it's really just an authorization problem around, well, have I authorized my agent to buy this? And so I can envision how that could get wired together where the e-commerce site is acting as the authorization server to issue and manage the authorization token that flows through a person server that represents the person that then lets an agent, go and buy something for you. And I think that model then enables commerce sites to expose, an API surface that's the API they want agents to use, because the usage patterns that they want to have an agent are different from a user, right? They don't want the agent to be able to crawl their entire site and inventory everything they have and look at all the, like, they don't want to enable scraping, right? But they do want to enable shopping. And so then you can, curate that API to be something that enables an agent to shop and find things and know, well, what else have you bought in the past? Learn that, know what you might want to buy. So that seems like a super interesting potential area that, alleviates some of the conflicts now between people that are building agents that, drive a web browser and pretending to be the user and then can literally do anything the user can do. Back to why did we create OAuth 2? Well, we didn't want to go and have users give their username and password to one site to crawl and do everything on another website. And that led us to, scopes and API surfaces. And so once again, I think AAuth could be like, oh, how do we move from people literally automating the web browser with an agent to letting their agent, work in more of an API scoped framework that works for both the user and the commerce site, but isn't something that could be abused.
Yes, that's amazing. Yeah, that was a really clear example for me to hear because everything that really puts it into perspective of like how AAuth enables like just the future just generally, whether it's like e-commerce or another application. I think it's a really interesting benefit too for AAuth to provide that mission for the agent to say, okay, here's what the agent was supposed to do. So then you can actually add hard boundaries or authorization or some sort of like runtime security controls around, okay, like this agent's trying to buy this thing, but that was not at all within its original mission. And so the user is more protected in that way. But also an e-commerce platform could potentially like use that data to understand, okay, like why was this agent trying to buy this? Why was this person trying to buy this in the first place? So it benefits everyone across the stack and for multiple reasons, not just security. I think those are the type of solutions that get adopted very quickly. So I'm excited for you and AAuth.
Yeah, we're excited about that. And then, one of the other things that I think I mentioned last time, and we had demos of it at the AAuth night, was, one of the things that was a core building block for AAuth was how do we give clients and clients in the HTTP sense of a client and a server, how do we give clients an identity, right? We've given servers have had identity with TLS, DNSSEC, Let's Encrypt has ripped the friction out of us knowing, of using HTTPS for everything, right? So now every site has HTTPS. We always know which server we're connecting to, but the server doesn't know who the client is, right? And that problem's being explored in the IETF WebBot auth around how does a bot that's crawling a website, just for your regular search crawling, but now many agents are crawling, and the concern is like, well, who is this bot? Do we want, is they're abusing the rate limits, right? They're denial of service attacks that maybe are intentional or not intentional, and that's become a big problem. So there's a fair amount of activity around how do we just give a bot an identity, and that was sort of a key piece that we wanted in AAuth as I was working to build that. It's like, how do we know, how does that piece of software have its own identity independent of everything else? And then we want to attach the legal person using that bot to that bot, but do that in a way where the bot has a long-term identity. And for the person, you might be able to just say, oh yeah, they're over 18. My person's over 18, right? I can prove they're over 18 without anything else about the person. But being able to have a client have an identity enables us to look at solving a few other challenges on the internet besides, there's the bot traffic, but one of the big challenges on the web today is API keys, which are just like this string, and if you've got the string, you can call the API, right? So huge amount of infrastructure set up in places like GitHub to see, did somebody check in an API key, right? And then be able to like try to invalidate that right away. And the underlying primitives in AAuth enable us to say like, oh no, let's just have the agent, client prove who it is, and the service can say, okay, I know who you are and you're allowed to do X, right? It's just an identity-based decision, and it's super easy for a site to add that if they're using API keys, because it's just another foreign key to reference the same record around what's allowed to happen, and gives you a little more clarity around like, okay, well, I have different agents calling. I've got the developers on their machines, I've got staging that's making calls when it's testing, and then I've got production. Now well, which one of the instances is the calling, as opposed to using the same API key everywhere, and then you have no idea which entity's making which call, which makes it a lot harder to debug or determine, did the key get lost? I don't know, right? When you rotate the key, it's like, okay, now I got to run around everywhere and change the key. It's better practice if people generate different keys for different environments, but they got to consciously choose that. And so that just gets rid of the whole shared secret, exfiltration of secrets challenge. And then, Ken Simpson from Mail Channel has demoed using, for his API to send email, that how an agent could connect to mail channels and start to send email right away in a more trusted manner. And how if you're a resource that's wanting people to build apps to use you, how you could start to use, AAuth would enable agents to start to use your resource right away, as opposed to you having to, the agent tells the user, okay, go to the console, create an account, wander around, try to find the API key, and then paste it in over here. Right? Like there's so many things wrong with each of those steps, where now the agent can start to work with it, and then when the resource needs to talk to a human, the protocol supports, hey, send your human here, and so that I can interact with them. And so there's an easy migration path for people that are just using API keys to go and just add in AAuth, and then they get to use like the existing sign-up login flow they have to have. They don't need to go and adopt the full stack. They can just grab the parts that help, and all of that can lower the conversion friction and adoption patterns of a resource, while also dramatically improving the security because we've got rid of API keys.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so many benefits from like AAuth, whether it's making so your agent can run without an API key. It provides the mission so that runtime security tools can actually track that over time and use that to make better decisions around what an agent can or cannot do. Plus like so much more. So super excited that this is like starting to resonate with the community. People are starting to understand this. and they're very familiar with these problems, and now they're looking for solutions. And super exciting that AAuth is one of those solutions that's going to actually like push the industry forward. So super excited for people to jump in and start like helping you, whether that's in like the Slack or they can go and try it themselves. What is next for AAuth in the next like month or so?
Well, next week is the ITF meeting in Vienna, and I'm giving a presentation in the OAuth working group on what are the gaps between OAuth and what agents need, and running a side meeting on AAuth. The OAuth working group has been inundated with many proposals for adding little agent-related things, and the working group's trying to figure out how do we go about solving that. I'm proposing let's just instead of trying to figure out how to backport a bunch of stuff into AAuth, that I think we need to actually start off with some new primitives, which is why I wrote AAuth, and maybe we should just do that as opposed to try to patch something that just doesn't have the right foundational models. And I'm hopeful that I'll have some initial drafts of some of the AAuth resources, like the Google one, and I'm going to reach out to see like who all wants to be in sort of the super early beta, because to go and do the powerful things at Google with Gmail, like read and send, those are restricted APIs, and so it's a long process that requires a security review of my infrastructure before Google lets me offer that broadly, but I can offer it to a small number of people that are interested in beta testing that. And one of the things that's been super useful is a number of people have been, implementing AAuth, talking to their own robots about how to go and implement and build some stuff, and then their robots say, I don't really know what to do here. And so they go and they help pull that together and they send me over, they either file an issue or just send me something in Slack or email me what the robot said about it, which then I go and I give to my robot and in the context of all the AAuth material, which often helps, provide some either additional clarity or, define something that maybe wasn't clear or well defined. And that's pretty exciting about how agents are helping rapidly improve a specification, right, as people use it to build it, right? And I feel like I've gotten about a year and a half worth of feedback and work in about a month and a half as people have, it's the barrier for someone to go and write an implementation is much lower. The quality of feedback around what you might improve is much higher because the robot's pulling it together. And then I'm able to go and take that feedback and give it to a robot. And so that's enabled me to, have a number of turns on the spec in a fairly quick period of time of like just, improving and clarifying what's happening in the specification, which then benefits everybody else because we've got, more clarity in how do you go about doing, when should you do X versus Y and what happens with Z, all that kind of stuff. So anybody that's, that love getting all the feedback, now's the time to provide that feedback and help guide what it is. It's very much a community of people working on it together now, which is very exciting for it to become like that.
Amazing. Yeah, and that was one of my big takeaways from AAuth Night also, is it just felt like a community that was rallied around this for multiple different angles and sides of the industry. So super excited to continue to, build that for Insecure Agents, but also be a part of the AAuth community, help you build that also. So yes, I think in closing, it was a great event. Thank you so much for coming out. I know you flew all the way from Lisbon to give that presentation and that demo that was so very well received. All of that content from the demos and the panel will be coming out here very shortly. And we will be doing another AAuth night here in the fall in San Francisco. We've got it penciled in for October 15th. So we'll definitely keep you updated about that. But other calls to actions in the meantime, go join the AAuth.dev Slack channel that Dick mentioned. Get involved, provide feedback, go do the walkthrough that's on that site, which is the same like demo that Dick gave at AAuth Night. Dick, any other closing thoughts or calls to actions for the audience to stay engaged?
Yeah, I forgot to mention about the walkthrough. A bunch of people have run that and are just, it's pretty fun because you're telling the agent to go and install and run AAuth and explain the protocol to you as it runs it. And so, there's a bunch of meta about that, about how we're building a protocol for agents, and then the agents run the protocol, and the agents explaining to you why it liked and what it did about the protocol. And so, people have found that to be pretty fun. If anyone's interested in doing, a live demo of something they're working on at AAuth Night, reach out. We're starting to, think about what we might be showing there. My hope is that we have like a whole bunch more live demos, nothing like real world stuff deployed for people to see and understand what's really going on. And so if you're interested, please reach out.
Amazing. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Jake, for coming back on, and we'll have you on again here shortly just to stay updated on what's happening with AAuth.
Great. Thanks, Al.